Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. In most of the program today, we're going to spend some time talking about foreign policy, and just a little bit later, bottom of the hour, we'll have Jay Sekulow with us, and he is, of course, the Chief Counsel with American Center for Law and Justice, but over the years has been writing a lot more about the issue of Islam, Iran, and this new book, Unholy Alliance, is something we'll talk about, and how that relates, of course, to the election and some of the issues of foreign policy. After all, we are electing a commander-in-chief. What will that mean? And then in the second hour, we'll spend an entire hour of Avi Lipkin. He is, of course, an individual that has been on the program with us many times before. Will give us a real understanding of what is happening in Israel, what's at stake, and probably give us a chance to ask all sorts of questions about the Middle East, about Israel, about our foreign policy. And so, again, I think you will really enjoy the program. So before we get to some of these foreign policy issues, I thought I'd cover just a few things in the news. And one has to do with the sticker shock that people are facing with Obamacare. But the first one I wanted to get to is that many of you in the listening audience are in states which have early voting. Some of you listening to this program may have already voted by now. One of the things I would certainly recommend that you do, especially if you are using one of these electronic voting machines, is to check and make sure that after you actually enter in your preference, whatever that might be, that the machine actually records it as such. Here is a story just coming out of the state of Texas. Yesterday was early voting, first day of early voting in the state of Texas. By the way, this has happened elsewhere, but this one perhaps the most egregious, which has gotten some national attention. And that is, let me just use one example, but there are many others. A woman in Amarillo was shocked to see that even though she had actually clicked the little button to vote Republican ticket, straight ticket, when she looked back, she noticed it highlighted the Clinton Kane box, and it was also highlighted. So some people are going to have to pay attention to this. Then said, I tried to go back and change it, could not get it to work, asked for help from one of the workers. She couldn't get it to go back either. So it took a second election person to get the machine to where I could correct the vote for a straight ticket. There's some value in not voting straight ticket, if for no other reason than to deliberately mark each one of those individuals, and that probably eliminates some of that. But the point I'm making is that I am becoming more and more disturbed about some of these machines. Perhaps you saw the story that came out just the other day. Concern grows over Soros-linked voting machines, and what they mean there is George Soros, for some time, of course, has been a big supporter of progressive ideas of the Democratic Party. And in particular, it turns out that these machines are indirectly linked to at least one of the companies he's a part of. Do I believe there's some great conspiracy? Not really, but I think it illustrates 2 points that I've made before. Number one, I think we might just be a lot better off if we go back to these optically scanned ballots. Many of you are in states where you have an optically scanned ballot. Those are the kind that they've used in SAT tests and they've used in Iowa tests and all the rest, and it's scanned optically because guess what? Number one, it makes it very easy to go back because you have a paper record, and if somebody disputes whether or not that was the actual count in that precinct, we still have the pieces of paper that are marked. And it's not like the hanging chads, well, did a person mean to click that one or not? And those, I think, may be a lot safer than these issues of electronic voting machines, which could be hacked, and they've been shown to do so. But that's the first issue. The second one is if we're going to use these machines, can we have some level of confidence that they accurately record what you put onto the machine? And this is where, after a while, I get so frustrated with some of the people that say there's no voter fraud, there's no problem with voter irregularities. I say, when we get to a point where we can trust these voting machines the same way we trust an ATM machine, then I'll stop talking about this. But until we do, let's just think about the fact that wherever I travel, I mean, I have, in the last year or two, I've been in Hungary, I've been in Israel, I've been in Greece, just to mention a few countries outside of the United States, not to mention all sorts of different states out inside the United States. I don't use an ATM machine very often, but when I do, I have complete confidence that even if I'm across the Atlantic Ocean, across the Pacific Ocean, in a city far away from my hometown, that when I ask that it take $25 out of my account, it doesn't take it out of somebody else's account. Or that I say I want to deposit some money, it doesn't put it in somebody else's account. And by the way, if that happened with our money, I guarantee you that there would be lawsuits, and probably if there was some kind of malfeasance or even deliberate attempt to manipulate those, people would go to jail. And yet every single year we have an election, and now we are starting to have elections almost every year, because it's not just every 2 years for congressional elections, every 4 years for presidential elections. Sometimes we have these off-year elections. I have come in front of these microphones now for 30 years telling stories every single day about somebody who tried to enter something into a voting machine and it was wrong, or it was they noticed that it clicked the wrong button or whatever. The answer that always comes back is, well, these are user error. Well, this is why I used the lady from Amarillo, because she actually knew that she voted straight ticket, but also noticed that Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine clicked as well. And then she had to get 2 different election workers before she got it fixed. So don't think this one had anything to do with the problem of user error, that she didn't really know what she was doing. And we have these stories that happen time and time again. Again, there are some value in early voting, if for no other reason than maybe this is an opportunity to shake out any of the difficulties before the day when the vast majority of individuals like to vote November 8th in this particular case. But it is frustrating for me to see this happening time and time again. If you heard stories every few days of individuals that when they went to an ATM machine found that the money went to the wrong account, or the deposit was put into somebody else's account, and this happened all the time, you'd immediately call for an investigation to find out what's happening. This seems to happen almost every year in the election services, and it just seems to me that it's time to fix the problem. Let's come back after the break and get into another issue, and that is a lot of people are facing Obamacare shock. And that is that across the board right now, the government, and that is in particular the Department of Health and Human Services, have reported that Obamacare premiums will go up another 25%. But given the fact that we broadcast in over 40 states, I'll give you a few more illustrations, because if you're a 27-year-old who lives in Arizona, yours goes up 116%. And when you look at just people in, of course, I mentioned Arizona for a minute. How about Oklahoma? Yours goes up 69%. I know we have listeners in Tennessee. That one goes up 63%. Minnesota, 59%. You get the idea. We've got some real problems. And in some respects, this illustrates how confident the Obama administration is, and maybe even Hillary Clinton is, about winning this election. Most of the time, these kinds of announcements happen after the election. This one actually happens 2 weeks before. Now, it might have been hard for them to keep that under wraps, but the fact is, we now know that Obamacare probably is going to lead to a single-payer plan. I think that's what Hillary Clinton wants. So we'll come back and talk about this. Then we're going to have a chance to hear from Jay Sekulow. All this coming up right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently unveiled an online tool that is supposed to help local officials see the dangers of climate change in their community. The Climate Change Adaptation Research Center provides a map that warns of the danger of climate change to each of the 8 regions of the United States. Now, these dire warnings were too much for Dr. William M. Briggs, who has been questioning many of the claims of climate change activists. In his column, he reminds us of what is really happening in these states that are supposed to be reeling from the negative effects of climate change. Yes, the climate has changed since 1980, and corn production in Michigan back then was 7.5 billion bushels. By 2015, it increased to 14 billion bushels. He then humorously notes that the EPA warns that climate change in corn-growing Michigan could exacerbate the risk of increased production. Farmers might run out of bushels if the correlation persists. The EPA also warns of the impact of climate change in Iowa. Once again, we find that there have been bumper crops of corn, soybean, and other foodstuffs. This is causing prices for food to drop. Climate change is thus bad news for those wanting higher prices. He says he can probably do this for every state, but I think you get the idea. If we're headed for a weather-induced Armageddon, the current facts don't seem to support these dire warnings. He also reminds us that back in 1936, there was an anomalous heat wave that killed over 12,000 Americans. But that was when there was a lot less carbon dioxide than we have right now. Or how about 1886, when the United States was hit by more hurricanes than any other year following it? Again, there was a lot less carbon dioxide back then. You know, the EPA is warning us of potential disasters in the future, but a look at current history and past history suggests that perhaps their predictions are too extreme. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just a minute ago, just shared with you again why you should pay attention to what you do when you vote. And for those of you that are using those machines, pay attention. 4 million people, as of Sunday, had already voted. I'll get a new number for you by the end of this week, and certainly by the end of next week, we will be in the tens of millions that will have voted before November 8th. And that's a reason to pay attention to how those machines are working and to make sure that your vote counts. And that is one of those issues we've talked about here on Point of View. Let me talk about this issue of the Affordable Care Act, oftentimes referred to as Obamacare. The Wall Street Journal put it this way. President Obama was in Miami. As a matter of fact, I think he was at Florida Memorial University right there in Florida, celebrating all the progress we've made in controlling costs. And then he also went on to portray the critics as having false and politically motivated talking points. And so the editors of the Wall Street Journal asked this question: does that apply to the actuaries at the Health and Human Services Department too? Because they reported that Obamacare premiums will soar 25% on average next year. And this is progress, all right. It's in the wrong direction. And they go on to say that the headline number understates the extent of the trouble. Liberals used to dismiss insurance premium shock by saying that the subsidies will offset any increase, and anyhow, beneficiaries can shop around for a cheaper plan. But the 25% figure refers to the rate spike for the second cheapest, what's called the silver plan, on each exchange from state to state, which is a key benchmark in the subsidy formula. In other words, these are kind of the mid-level insurance plans that are performing at best, not the average increase over the whole issue of the Obamacare coverage. And again, the example they use there is a 27-year-old. And of course, I feel sorry for those of you that are in your 20s and 30s. Those of you that are millennials are bearing a tremendous burden, because if you, without Obamacare, were to have gone out into the health insurance market, you would pay a fraction of what you're paying, because the goal of Obamacare is to make you pay a lot more, because after all, you are probably going to come down with too many medical ailments, but we're going to charge you a lot more so that you can pay for the older people. And so as a result, a 27-year-old in Arizona, and we broadcast in Arizona, will see his or her premiums increase 116%. Now, if that's not sticker shock, I don't know what is. I know we have listeners in Oklahoma at 69% there, Tennessee 63%. I can go through the list, but I just picked a few states where we broadcast, and in a few minutes, if you'd like to join the conversation, love to hear from you. One of the people we have on the program is Dr. Merrill Matthews, and he's written a piece here in which he makes the argument, which I've agreed with since the beginning, that the goal was not Obamacare. The Obamacare program, or what you might call the Affordable Care Bill, was simply to get us to a single-payer plan. And that this would be so complicated that eventually this would get you to where you have a plan that looks like Canada or the United Kingdom. And that's exactly what Dr. Merrill Matthews, who is one of the leading experts, I think, that we bring to the program so many times on this issue of healthcare issues. And he says the price of the most popular health plan sold through healthcare.gov is once again facing a steep hike next year, this time by an average of 25%, thanks to the Obamacare mandates and regulations. And should Democrats win the White House, Hillary Clinton will likely use Obamacare's exploding costs, shrinking network of physicians, and fleeing health insurers to make the case for what the left really wanted all along, and that is a government-run, single-payer healthcare system. He goes on to say that Obama remade the health insurance system, promising repeatedly that health insurance premiums for families would drop by $2,500 by the end of his first term. Obviously, that did not take place. Dr. Merrill Matthews goes on to say, anyone who thinks that health care prices and spending will go down when you expand health coverage to millions of uninsured, force insurers to cover many more procedures, and pump in hundreds of billions of federal tax dollars is a fool. Now, again, that's what Dr. Merrill Matthews says. He says, for example, guaranteed issue, the regulation at the heart of Obamacare, incentivize people to forego buying a policy until they get sick and need coverage, and then drop the policy after they get well. The result is insurance pools that are smaller and sicker and therefore more expensive. So again, that's an important issue. And he says as well that these premium increases have resulted in and will continue to cause millions of Americans shifting to very high deductibles, which will push even more younger and healthier people out of the health insurance market. He goes on to say the president says we can't go back to the old system that left so many people without coverage, yet millions have had their coverage canceled multiple times under Obamacare. I'd love to know, if we have a program where we will dedicate an hour or 2 hours to it, how many of you say, you know, the one I had before wasn't great, but it's a whole lot better than what I've got now, because more and more of you have called into this program on numerous occasions saying, I'm paying twice as much and getting half the coverage, or I'm paying 2 or 3 times as much and I might have some coverage, but I can't go to the doctor or the hospital or the clinic that I used to go to. And so you've got to say that this is a problem. Now, again, I've been quoting from, of course, Wall Street Journal, and I've been also quoting from Dr. Merrill Matthews. But how about I quote from some people in the Democratic Party? Here's what Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, had to say. He says, you've got this crazy system where all of a sudden 25 million more people have health care, and the people who are out there busting it, sometimes working 60 hours a week, wind up with their premiums doubled and their coverage cut in half. I think I just said that. And that came from the former president of the United States, the husband of who? Hillary Clinton. So I think it gives you a little bit of an idea of some of those issues. Let's, if we can, take a few phone calls. We're going to be very quickly getting into our conversation with Jay Sekulow, but if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head to Florida first. WTJT. Phil, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. When he introduced the contract with America, he also mentioned the ladies that had falsely accused him, and the Bible says one who will bear false witness against his neighbor, like being hit with a sledgehammer or stabbed with a sword. And so it was not just about him, Clarence Thomas and Herman Cain. The Democrats always seem to find these people, and it's really disenfranchising all those who support Donald Trump by making these false accusations, and it happens every a cycle almost. And so,
but you made a comment there about the contract with the American voter, and I thought I might mention that just before I take a break here, because yesterday I read through some of that, and I have a commentary coming out next week. Donald Trump, as you pointed out, in Gettysburg actually issued what was called the contract with the American voter back in 1994. Of course, you had a contract with America that was actually written by Newt Gingrich and Dick Armey. But in his contract with the American voter, you might say, okay, well, if Hillary Clinton wants a single-payer plan, what does Donald Trump want? Well, and here he has in his repeal and replace Obamacare Act, he wants to, of course, repeal Obamacare and replace it with health savings accounts, which he talked about, and then also the ability to purchase health insurance across state lines, which we've talked about, and then let various states manage the Medicaid funds. So what he wants to do is go the other direction, that is to have more market competition. We don't have a lot of market competition right now. Some of you will find out that you only have one particular insurance company that you can buy insurance from. And when there's no competition inside the state and there's no competition across state lines, guess what happens? That's never a good way to reduce costs and increase the benefits and the various kinds of service. So there are, I think, even in this issue, striking differences. As I've said before, and if you have the October issue of Outlook that we've sent out, there are real differences between the Democratic Party platform and the Republican Party platform. There are real differences even in this issue of health care, which are surfacing with the explosion of costs between Hillary Clinton, who probably wants to move it to a single-payer plan, has said so as much, and Donald Trump, who wants to move it to one where you have more patient autonomy because you have your own health savings account and figure out how you're going to spend it and where you're going to spend it, and the issue of competition. So a good point coming out of this contract with the American voter. We can come back to this issue, but I just wanted to cover a little bit of it today in the first half an hour. Now we're going to have a chance to hear from Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice. His new book, Unholy Alliance, is a very detailed look. We'll only get about a half an hour with him, but I think you'll get a pretty good idea of why we have jihadism, why we have terrorism. What about this alliance between Russia and Iran? Some really great material in the book. We'll do our best to try to cover some of that. And, of course, if you would like to ask him a question, we'll have some limited time. In the second hour, Avi Lipkin will be with us, and we'll spend an entire hour talking about Israel and taking as many calls as you have about what's happening in the Middle East, in Israel, and our war on terror. So we'll take a break, but we'll be back right after this.
They call this the information age. It used to be news was hard to come by and there were very few sources. Now, the problem isn't so much locating information, it's all over the place. The problem is figuring out who you can trust to bring you truthful analysis and insights. Job loss in America, is it China's fault? Is poverty around the world increasing or decreasing? Are the undercover Planned Parenthood videos really deceptive propaganda or a window into a world that many people don't want you to know about? What kind of experience does it take to be a good president? Is putting women in our special forces a great idea, or are there issues you may not be considering? Kerby Anderson has talked about all of these and much more on his regular Viewpoints commentaries. Sign up to get them in your inbox each weekday. Go to pointofview.net. Click on the link at the very top left of the page that says Connect with Point of View. That's pointofview.net and connect with Point of View. Let Kerby help you sort through information overload and find the truth with viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
As we've been promoting, we are now joined by Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice. Of course, an accomplished Supreme Court advocate, argued all sorts of very important landmark cases before the Supreme Court. Individual that also is the author of a New York Times best-selling book, which I mentioned so many times when we talk about Islam, when we talk about ISIS or the War on Terror. That book, Rise of ISIS, a Threat That You Can't Ignore. And also, of course, we've talked with him in the past about his book, Undemocratic, Rogue, Reckless, and Renegade, how the government is indeed causing all the problems we're facing. And now we want to spend some time talking about this new book, Unholy Alliance, The Agenda Iran, Russia, and Jihadists Share for Conquering the World. Jay Sekulow, always great to have you on the program with us.
Hey, Kerby, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
You have a law of war team, and a lot of people might say, well, I always know Jay Sekulow for the individual standing up for religious liberty and fighting for our rights, but these last two books have really also caused you to focus your time and attention on what's happening in the Middle East, and you're concerned that we might eventually witness genocide of historic proportions.
Well, we're seeing genocide right now, and historic proportions, unfortunately, that is a big number to hit, but it's moving in that direction. And we did start, Kerby, as you mentioned, we started our Law of War team almost, I guess, about 5 years ago, and really got it going in a big way. And then now there's 4 lawyers involved, a couple of government affairs professionals, military analysts, over the last couple of years, because what we've increasingly seen is not only attacks on Israel's sovereignty, its right to exist as a Jewish state, but also our own ability or willingness to engage the enemy, how that works when international law is violated, the law of war, the law of armed conflict. And I've been very fortunate in that over the last 5 years, I've been able to spend a considerable amount of time in the summer at the University of Oxford, either lecturing or participating in various programs, including extended study time and writing time at the Bodleian Library, the historic Bodleian Library, where I had access to some of the great thinkers of the world that have engaged the Middle East in modern history, whether it's Winston Churchill, T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, Benjamin Disraeli, and others, and got to look at the original documents, original correspondence. So what we put together in the brand new book, Unholy Alliance, the agenda that Iran, Russia, and Jihadists Share for Conquering the World, actually was about the culmination of almost 4 years' worth of research.
Let me just mention, too, we'll get into the book itself, but since you mentioned law, one of the questions that surfaces so often, Jay, is how the principles of Sharia law contradict and conflict with English law, American law, our legal tradition. Can you just speak to that for a moment?
Well, sure. Sharia law is Islamic law and Islamic jurisprudence. It's a comprehensive code of law that is implemented in various degrees depending on the Islamic country. But with the Islamic Republic of Iran, it is the most severe version of the Shia interpretation of Sharia law. Now, here's what's the dynamic is that there are portions of places in England and even in the United States where there's been attempts, and in England they've been successful, in actually using Sharia law as the law when it comes to what we would call family law, marriage, divorce, child custody, those kind of things. But it's even been raised as a defense to horrible things like spousal abuse, where they have relied on Sharia law as the justification that's saying, well, basically under Sharia law, where the man's allowed to abuse the woman this way. And this is what they'll actually argue in courts in England, and they've tried to argue it in courts in the United States. And then the Islamists will, Kerby, often say that Sharia is compatible with the U.S. Constitution. But what they really mean by that, and I think this is something you got to really focus in on, is they know the Constitution can be amended. So what their view is, sure, it's compliant with the Constitution in the sense that you can amend the Constitution and make it Sharia compliant.
Very good. Again, we've talked about that before, so I thought I'd put that on the table for a moment. But Let's get back to the book. The Agenda, Iran, Russia, and Jihadists Share to Conquering the World. This is, even as people read the subtitle, go, well, again, if they've probably heard this program, they've heard about that. But I think most people would think Russia has nothing in common with Iran and nothing in common with jihadists. How do those three entities come together?
Well, here's the irony. The irony is they certainly do not share a theological framework. So the Russians, which were primarily during the Soviet era an atheistic, agnostic country, but there was always this undercurrent of Christian Orthodoxy and the Russian Orthodox tradition. So they share nothing in common with the Iranians from a theological base. So they're not working from a theological perspective, but they do share a globalist worldview, and that what the Russians are trying to do with the Iranians, and they were foes for many, many years, but now they've got this alliance, and what they are looking at is both a trading partner, military acquisition of equipment from the Iranians is a major source of economic impact for the Russians. That's number one. Number two, the Russians were even allowed to land jet fighters in Iran, which violates the Islamic Republic of Iran's own constitution, which allows no foreign fighters to be on their soil, but they let the Russians do it. So the Russians were able to key off of Iran in some of their sorties or attacks in Syria. And they have a common agenda, and that is to prop up the Assad regime, because what the Iranians want is Shia dominance, and they view Syria as although Assad is a Alawite, that they view that as more akin to Shia. It's a form of Shiism, that branch of Islam. And the Russians want a warm water port, which they have. It's their only warm water port in Syria. So the fact is they've got this common agenda. So their ultimate goal is not to challenge ISIS. The ultimate goal for them is really to keep afloat this whole notion of world dominance and major player in the region. And Russia, because of our own inept foreign policy, has become a major player in the region again. I mean, they haven't been in this role since the fall of the Soviet Empire. And now they are a major player, and I'd say, unfortunately, the major world figure or world player country-wise in the Middle East right now.
Talking with Jay Sekulow, and again, he is Chief Counsel with the American Center for Law and Justice. We have information about him. We have a link, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute, aclj.org, so you can find out more about the organization, get a copy of the book, although I'm sure you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore. I've seen it everywhere. But we also have a little video trailer. It's only about a minute long, and my assignment to you is to watch the video trailer and then click that share button and put it on your Facebook or send it to someone. Start a conversation, because this is really important, especially, Jay, during this election season. And given the fact that we're just 2 weeks away, you just mentioned our policy towards Russia and Iran. I think we have some clear differences in terms of the future commander-in-chief, in terms of how Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump would address these very important areas of the world. Don't we have those differences?
I mean, the differences are staggering in scope. What you're basically with Hillary Clinton, you've got a repeat of or extension of the existing policy of Barack Obama. To be fair to her, I think she's probably more hawkish than President Obama is. So in that sense, because I think President Obama has taken us to areas we never thought as a country we would end up going to on a foreign policy issue. Having said that, Donald Trump is taking what I would call more of a nuanced approach, but a strong America approach. And a strong America approach, I think, is a good approach. Now, having said that, the fact is that so much of this is dependent upon not only the commander-in-chief, but as you know, Kerby, it's going to depend on where the Senate is. It's going to depend on where the military readiness is. I mean, I think one of the major factors we have to look at this election cycle is military readiness. Our military has been devastated. We're still the strongest military in the world, but we're nowhere near where we could be, nor where we need to be right now. And I think this is why we've got to realize we're in a... I say in the book, this fight that we're engaged in, this long-term intergenerational conflict with radical jihadists. I mean, what's the difference between a radical jihadist and a jihadist? Nothing. I mean, they're jihadists. This is intergenerational. They don't look at the world in 6 years or 10 years. They look at it intergenerationally. And this is what I said. I said, this is not an option battle that we got to win. We will win. We must win. We have no option. So we have got to win this. Now, it may take longer than we had anticipated. We don't like long battles. And I know people are sick and tired of engaging our troops, but our troops are going to have to be in the position to engage. Look, we're engaging in Syria right now. Why? Why are we in Iraq right now? We're there because a vacuum was created by President Obama, and ISIS rises up, and now you've got to deal with where the enemy is, and the enemy's in Mosul. It's in Aleppo. I mean, this is where you've got the Raqqa. I mean, you've got these major funnel points, if you will. And so I think this election is critical. Look, at the end of the day, we still have the strongest military in the world, and we should never forget that.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jay Sekulow. You know, we earlier were talking about Donald Trump's contract with the American voter, and one of those points that he talks about is his idea of introducing Restoring National Security Act, which would rebuild our military by eliminating the defense sequester and expanding military investment. So obviously we're seeing some stark differences in the Democratic and Republican platform, what they would actually do in Iran and Iraq and other places, Syria. So we want to continue our conversation. We'll do so with Jay Sekulow as we talk about his new book, Unholy Alliance. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. Graduate Brooks Hamby was a nervous wreck. Brooks was from the small town of Brawley, California, where he earned the right to deliver an address to the students as the salutatorian of his graduating class. The school felt the need to review his speech, rejecting the first two versions of the speech he submitted. He was told to remove all references to Jesus, God, and generally to be less religious. The third time he submitted his manuscript, it was returned to him with black marks censoring any reference to religion. But not only that, Brooks was told by his principal that if he tried to read the religious parts anyway, his microphone would be shut off mid-speech. Well, as the ceremony approached, Brooks was anxious. What should he do? What could he do? If he listened to his principal and hide his faith, he would compromise his convictions. If he didn't, he would be publicly humiliated. Brooks chose to reference his faith anyway. Remarkably, not only did his microphone stay on, the video of his bold speech sped throughout the internet in the days following graduation. We sent a letter to Brawley High School reminding them that when a student has earned the right to speak to his peers, the school should listen to him instead of censoring his faith. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jay Sekulow with us for just a few more minutes. Again, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, talking about the book Unholy Alliance, The Agenda, Iran, Russia, and Jihadists Share for Conquering the World. And Jay, one of the other questions that comes from our listeners sometimes, and you address this both in your book Rise of ISIS and this book as well, is that what is it that makes a person a jihadist? You give us a little bit of the history, because they say, look, I know Muslim students, I have Muslim friends, I have Muslim coworkers, they're not jihadists. So what's the trigger? Can you explain a little bit about the rise of jihadism?
Yeah, so this is a version, and people say, well, it's not a majority of Islam, and it's not a majority of Islam, but let's say it's 7 or 10%. That's a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Millions and millions of people. So jihadists, and you used to call them radical jihadists, and I try to, I'm kind of getting away from that because any jihadist is a radical. So a jihadist takes their position that it's not just a religion, but a political movement, a theocracy, a form of governance. And the jihadists will use whatever means necessary, including violent means, as we know, to basically make the world Sharia compliant, that everything will be under the flag of Islam, if you will. There'll be those outside of Islam and those inside of Islam, and their goal is that everybody is inside of Islam. And the jihadists will have the desire to get, on a very quick basis, now quick for them could be decades, but moving very aggressively, very quickly, to the Sharia dominance, to a Islamic worldview, to an Islamic culture. Then you have, that's in contraindication, by the way, different than the true reformers. There are reformers within Islam, but I don't buy this, Kerby, I don't buy this moderate Islamist versus a jihadist, because what is a moderate jihadist? It's a jihadist with patience. I mean,
and talking about cultural
there
jihad
are reformers,
too.
though, and I don't want to speak ill of the whole faith, although I think it's theologically completely bankrupt and incorrect. But having said that, the fact of the matter is there are real reformers. I think of people like Zuhdi Jasser and others who are real reformers, but they're viewed as apostates within Islam.
And we've had him on the program and some others. And again, that's the difficulty, because what the jihadists will do is they say, if you take a literal interpretation of the Quran, say Surah 9:5 and other passages like that, then that is a direct and specific command given not only in the 7th century, but it applies today. And so we should be engaged in a jihad against infidels and apostates and pagans and other kinds of individuals. And so it's always kind of been difficult to reform Islam. Yep. But back to the point that you're making, we need to pay attention to this alliance between Russia, Iran, and the jihadists. And even though we maybe find ourselves a little bit shaking our head because of the theological differences there, if we don't have that kind of mindset in the State Department and the Defense Department, and especially in the Oval Office, we're in a lot of trouble, aren't we? We are. And I'll tell you this, this is an alliance that's unprecedented in world history. So you've normally not had a situation with this kind of lethality, where you've got a rebirth, basically, of Russia of old, more of an empire, imperialistic Russia, coupled with a government that is not only Islamic in name, but Islamic in fact with Iran. And you put on top of that, they're working together. And what you've got to really be concerned about is, for instance, you've got this is, again, kind of unheard of, the Shia Iranians funding the Sunni Hamas. 30 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. Yes. It's not anymore. Now, ultimately, they would go after each other. But the fact is, right now, they look at a common enemy. Who's the common enemy? The common enemy is Israel and the United States. Let me, just before we run out of time, talk about what's available at your website. We have a link to aclj.org. And again, this is an opportunity for people to sign some petitions related to all sorts of different issues to support the number of lawsuits. And I think almost every time I hear you on radio, you're talking about another lawsuit that you're bringing. So talk about how our listeners, at Point of View, can partner with you and help you out. Well, look, first, ACLJ, as you know, and Kerby, you've been staying with us for a long time, is a nonprofit public advocacy legal organization. We have offices all over the world, including multiple offices in the United States, large office, of course, in Washington, D.C., but offices throughout the country. And what we do is stand up for not only religious freedom, but freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, the right to petition our government for redress of grievance. Basically, you take the First Amendment, that's what we do. Right now, we're engaged in a series of battles with the State Department, with the Department of Justice, on a whole host of issues, including some of the scandals. We just won a major case against the Internal Revenue Service at the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. We're finally going to be able to hold the IRS accountable. So, we are trying to engage the culture, engage our government, and really protect and defend religious liberty and religious freedom. I'm the grandfather of 4 grandkids. I have 3 granddaughters and a grandson. And I want to make sure we leave them a country the best we can, free, where liberty is paramount, freedom is understood, and religious freedom is
who we are as a people.
Again, if you're concerned about the IRS, the Justice Department, if you're concerned about what has happened in the Middle East, those are just a few things we can mention, and many, many more that are being addressed right now by aclj.org. We have a link there. And again, don't forget, we have that 1-minute video which gives you a summary of the book Unholy Alliance. I would encourage you to watch it. Of course, get a copy of the book, but also spread the news so that other people will take the time to read the book. The Rise of ISIS was such an incredible book, and this was one that follows up on it to help us understand a little bit more about this Unholy Alliance. So, Jay Sekulow, always great to have you on the program with us.
Thanks for having me, Kerby. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into this whole issue of Israel in more detail because Avi Lipkin will be joining us, and so I encourage you to visit the website pointofview.net. We have the links to the American Center for Law and Justice. We have information about the book Unholy Alliance. It's all there for you. And, of course, you probably hear Jay Sekulow on a pretty regular basis with Sean Hannity. And, of course, he's been a friend of this ministry for many years. He and Kelly Shackelford are the best of friends as well. They oftentimes work together in various cases related to the Supreme Court. So I just wanted you to know a little bit more about his book. He's a busy guy. As a matter of fact, this is the third time we've tried to get him on the program. Just every time we try to get him scheduled, he's got a court case. And so I always say that members of Congress do not control their lives. People like Jay Sekulow don't either, because all of a sudden you have some change in a court docket. And so this has been an attempt to get him on for some time, but it fits perfectly with the conversation we're going to have with our good friend Avi Lipkin. He used to write under the pen name Victor Mordecai, and you perhaps have seen some of his books. Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat? A Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, the Islamic Threat Updates Almanac, Israel's Bible Block, and Islam Prophesied in Genesis, to mention just a few. Some of you have been asking to have him on, so we've fulfilled that request, and we'll have a chance to hear from him and find out a little bit more about what's happening in Israel, what's happened in the Middle East. But most importantly, I want to leave this last hour here for your questions. If you've got questions about the Middle East, you have questions about Israel, you've got questions about the election, this is why we have him on the program. So I have lots of questions, but I know you do too. So I wanted to give you that opportunity to have an entire hour with him, to ask questions, to make comments. And so we are going to open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Let me mention that we're, of course, right in the middle of an election season, so don't forget we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. My Viewpoints commentary today on climate change, which I think you'll appreciate. And then, of course, as I've mentioned a few times, we have a trip to Alaska in August. I know you're in October, maybe not thinking about what you're going to do in August, but be thinking about it, because this is going to be an opportunity for you to not only join with us, some of the Point of View staff, but we're also going to have Penna Dexter and her family, Kelly Shackelford and his family. It's going to be a little bit like our Friday roundtable for an entire week. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and it would be a great opportunity to even maybe connect up with some of our listeners up there in the great state of Alaska. So you can find out all about those issues right on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. I'll have a few questions for Avi Lipkin, and then I'll open it up for your questions and comments. Stay tuned. We have a lot more right after this.
From Pure Flakes comes I'm Not Ashamed. April 20th, 1999, the worst school shooting in U.S. history at Columbine High School. One victim was Rachel Joy Scott. Her life was taken, but her story lives on.
Jesus gave his life for me, and I'll give my life to him.
Based on her personal journals, I'm Not Ashamed, rated PG-13. Now playing. More information at I'mNotAshamedFilm.com. Kerby recently wrote about the growing threat to our religious freedom. I hope you read that letter. There are few things more important. Many ministries say 2016 has been tough, very tough. I think a lot of us are down about the mess surrounding this election, but we dare not take our eyes off these issues, and Point of View will not. But we need your help. We really need your help right now to press on. Please visit pointofview.net, click the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
As we've been promoting, we now are joined by Avi Lipkin. He's in Israel. So again, I want you to understand that this is what we call a long-distance phone call. Individual that many of us first knew as Victor Mordecai, since he wrote some of his early books under that pen name. Some of the books, for example, is Fanatic Islam, A Global Threat, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, The Islamic Threat Updates, Israel's Bible Block, and Islam Prophesied in Genesis, an individual that has actually served in the IDF, also is a senior editor and translator in the news department of the government press office, ran for the Israeli Knesset under the Judeo-Christian Bible Block Party, and an individual that actually is a bit of a wanted man just because of his stands not only against Islam by Muslims, but even wanted in Switzerland for his stands on the initiative which would prevent Muslims from building minarets. So there's a lot to talk about today. Avi, always great to have you on the program.
And great to be on your show.
I might just mention for our listeners that are not familiar with you, some of our old-time listeners have said, we've been listening to this guy for decades, but we did post an article here, despite threats to his life, expert Avi Lipkin warns of radical Islamist threat, and it's a nice summary of who you are and some of the things that have happened to you over the years, but we are in the midst, as you well know, of an election, and I would love to get your analysis and thoughts about maybe the difference between the two presidential candidates as it relates to Israel and some of the very significant tensions we just talked about a few minutes ago in the Middle East as we talked with Jay Sekulow. So you're on the ground there. What are some of the concerns that we should have, and how should we evaluate those two candidates?
Well, I'm going to start with something which is going to flabbergast most of your listeners, and that is that we see after World War II a movement which basically becomes the European Union and says that we don't want any more war in Europe between Christian white Europeans. And it has been very successful. There has been no more wars on European ground between the French and the Germans and the Russians and the English. I mean, for 2,000 years they were killing each other. The bad side to all of this, though, is that they blame God. They blame religion. And nationalism and patriotism. And so today in Europe, it is a very bad thing to be a patriot. It is a very bad thing to be a Christian, to be religious. So basically, Europe has become socialist. It has become anti-God. And what we see today with Hillary Clinton, with the Clintons, with Obama, is the United States basically is shedding, or not the United States, the agenda, which is very similar to the European agenda, is shedding God, shedding patriotism, shedding religion, morality, law, constitution. And so what happens is the elections today in the United States, coming up in 2 weeks, and by the way, I voted today by absentee ballot for President Trump, God willing. And there were a whole lot of people. We were at a festival out here in Judea and Samaria. Everybody voted Trump, all the Americans who were there. So, Donald Trump should know that a lot of people support him. But what I'm trying to say here is that voting for Trump is voting for what made America great. And even though Trump is not specifically an evangelical Christian or a churchgoer, But Donald Trump represents those people who believe in the values that made America great. Hillary Clinton represents the globalist agenda. Of course, the globalist agenda is a very unusual matrimony between the working class, the working class meaning the democratic, hard labor base, and the international globalist tycoons, which take away jobs from America. I don't want to go into all this, but the point I'm saying is in Israel, we see Trump as a friend. Everybody here in Israel is talking about the ambush that President Obama is preparing for us on November the 9th. In other words, regardless of who wins the elections, Obama is preparing an ambush with the French, with the United Nations, with the Palestinians, with the Islamic world against Israel. And so we are very concerned about it. Netanyahu talks about this all the time. Hillary Clinton has a track record. She has a 30-year track record of supporting Islamic charities, Islamic causes. She seems to have a very negative side when it comes to Israel, to Zionism, and to Jewish charities. She is not friendly to Israel in the real sense. She's not friendly to American law enforcement and military. I shouldn't go into things that you probably have rehashed 100 times already. But here in Israel, we are aware of this because those people who hate Christianity and hate God hate Israel too. And this is a question for you guys. It's maybe an election, and some people think the election comes and goes. But for us, Israel doesn't come and go. Israel has to fight for its survival. So the majority of people in Israel, in spite of the socialist Israeli media, is in favor of Trump.
That is interesting. Now, what about Hillary Clinton? You mentioned about favorable towards Islam. You've done some study on the connections of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I know your wife actually did translations of some of the things that the Muslim Brotherhood said, and the connection to the Obama administration, and even the connection to the aide to Hillary Clinton, Huma Abedin. What about that?
Well, we shouldn't forget about 20 years ago, after Bill Clinton left the White House, he got $20 million from the Saudis for his library in Harlem in New York City. And there are lists and lists of very big contributions and $250,000 fees for Hillary to speak to Islamic organizations. Hillary is not a member of Hadassah. There are many Christian women all over the United States that have joined Hadassah, which is a hospital, but it's also a very important charitable institution. Many Christian ladies join this. Hillary is not a member of Hadassah or any Jewish or Zionist organization. She is, however, Hillary is a member of Suha Arafat's Muslim children charity. And, you look at these little things. I've been watching her like a hawk since the 1960s. And this woman is not a friend of the Jewish people, not a friend of God, not a friend of our Judeo-Christian faith.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Avi Lipkin. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we are going to have an entire hour with him. Maybe even after the election, we'll spend some time, especially when he's in town, if we can make that happen, just to have him sit around the table for 2 hours answering all sorts of questions. But I know many of you do have questions about Israel, about the capital of Israel, about the tensions between Israel and the Middle East, about the Iranian deal in terms of nuclear arms. All sorts of issues certainly are relevant. And if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let me also drive you to our website. And as you go there, that will take you to his website, vicmord.com. It's VICMORD.com. It's based upon his pen name, Victor Mordecai, and all the books that we'll have been talking about and will be talking about, all of the information, some of the videos, even an opportunity for you to schedule him next time he comes into the United States. He's spoken in more than 1,000 churches and synagogues. So again, we have a link to vicmord.com. We'll continue our conversation, but we'll also take your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Environmental Protection Agency recently unveiled an online tool that is supposed to help local officials see the dangers of climate change in their community. The Climate Change Adaptation Research Center provides a map that warns of the danger of climate change to each of the 8 regions of the United States. Now, these dire warnings were too much for Dr. William M. Briggs, who has been questioning many of the claims of climate change activists. In his column, he reminds us of what is really happening in these states that are supposed to be reeling from the negative effects of climate change. Yes, the climate has changed since 1980, and corn production in Michigan back then was 7.5 billion bushels. By 2015, it increased to 14 billion bushels. He then humorously notes that the EPA warns that climate change in corn-growing Michigan could exacerbate the risk of increased production. Farmers might run out of bushels if the correlation persists. The EPA also warns of the impact of climate change in Iowa. Once again, we find that there have been bumper crops of corn, soybean, and other foodstuffs. This is causing prices for food to drop. Climate change is thus bad news for those wanting higher prices. He says he can probably do this for every state, but I think you get the idea. If we're headed for a weather-induced Armageddon, the current facts don't seem to support these dire warnings. He also reminds us that back in 1936, there was an anomalous heat wave that killed over 12,000 Americans. But that was when there was a lot less carbon dioxide than we have right now. Or how about 1886, when the United States was hit by more hurricanes than any other year following it? Again, there was a lot less carbon dioxide back then. You know, the EPA is warning us of potential disasters in the future, but a look at current history and past history suggests that perhaps their predictions are too extreme. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, I'm not ashamed. Rachel Scott's life was taken at Columbine High, but her story lives on. Rated PG-13. Now playing.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Early day with us today, Avi Lipkin. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me open up the phones, but just before we take some phone calls, let me, if I can, maybe educate a few of our listeners. There are people that are maybe hearing you for the first time. We've picked up new radio stations and all of the rest. And one of the things that I've learned from you over the years, Avi, is that your wife, Rachel, born in Egypt, and because of that, oftentimes would monitor some of these Arabic language broadcasts. And if there's one thing we've learned from you because of your wife when she actually was doing that in the past, it is that they, in the Arab world, say one thing to us in English, but they say something different in Arabic, don't they?
Absolutely correct. And there is indeed in Islam ideology known as taqiyya. Taqiyya means that it is permissible and it is actually recommended and commanded to lie to the infidel as part of the art of war, art of deception. And so what the Muslims are saying to the Christians, the Christian West, very often are lies in order to get the world to believe them. But what they say in Arabic, we hear what they say in Arabic, and what they're saying in Arabic is kill the Jew on Saturday, kill the Christian on Sunday.
Yeah. So again, kill the Saturday believers and the Sunday believers. And so it's not surprising then in Islam that they talk about the Satan, the little Satan and the great Satan. You live in the little Satan and I live in the great Satan. But in some respects, we see a distinction, but we really shouldn't. And it's amazing to me how many will be willing to turn their back on Israel and say, well, that's, we should just come up with a two-state solution. And hey, even if the Jews lose the land, what's the big deal? And not see the obvious connection to the fact that from a jihadist Muslim worldview, they really recognize anybody who will not submit under Sharia law as the enemy. True?
Very correct. And I wanted to add something very important before we forget, because the 1 hour goes by very quickly. The United Nations UNESCO organization has come out not once, but a few times, saying that the Jews have no connection to Jerusalem. It is a Muslim holy city.
Yeah.
And one of the things that gets me extremely upset is that the Christian world is really asleep. The Christian world is not paying attention to the denigration of Judeo-Christianity. And, you know, I had a meeting with the Vatican ambassador to Israel, Pietro Sambi, Archbishop Pietro Sambi, 10 years ago. And he said, you know, if there was never a temple on the Temple Mount, where did Jesus overturn the money changers' tables? Where did he go on Hanukkah? That's John 10, verse 22. Where did he go for his bar mitzvah when he was 12, if you remember, Left Behind? And I'm not talking about Tim LaHaye's movie. So the temple is a very integral part of faith in Christianity, faith in the New Testament. And Archbishop Sambi said that any denigration of Judaism is a denigration of Christianity. Any attack on the Old Testament is an attack on the New Testament. And so, of course, one of the bottom lines of my work for the last 26 years in Christian churches is to strengthen the alliance between Jews and Christians and our common faith. The Old Testament is common faith for the Jews and the Christians.
Let's talk about that for just a minute, because I know one of your goals is to kind of awaken people to be defenders of Israel, and that can be done through a variety of ways, politically, economically, tourism. Your whole book, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. Talk about that for just a minute, because, again, some of our listeners might actually like to have you come and speak in their church.
Yes, indeed. And actually, I am planning to come back to Texas in February, March, God willing. Also, I have to tell you, a little correction to your introduction.
Okay.
The Bible Bloc Party was submitted to the Israeli government 4 or 5 months ago, and for procedural reasons, they started picking on all kinds of procedural points.
Oh, okay.
And so we have to re-sign everyone to get the party registered. The party's not registered yet. I have not yet run for the Knesset. The party is now, as of this week, we're going to start re-signing up everyone. We still have the money. And we're going to submit the party latest by December. So I have to see what happens in Israel, because if, for whatever reason, elections are declared in Israel, then I cannot come to Texas in March. But my plan at this time is to come to Florida and the southern United States between late January and late March. So, indeed, thank you very much for that.
Well, again, we'll do that. Let me just mention, then, I was reading that from one of the articles we posted, so that means that third paragraph there is incorrect, so we'll fix that if we can, although it's somebody else's argument. But you also, I know, are spending a fair amount of time trying to educate people about what I guess are called the 5 deceptions of Islam. And, of course, you have written a book called Islam Prophesied in Genesis. By the way, I have most of those on my shelf. But, again, for some of our new listeners, talk about that for a minute. How do we think about Islam and its place in the world, and what are some of those deceptions that we as Christians need to know about?
Well, deception number one is that Islam is a religion of love. Now, you know, Jesus teaches that the 2 most important commandments, and they're Jewish commandments, by the way, are love the Lord thy God and love thy fellow as thyself. So these commandments are not in the Quran. Jesus even says love the enemy. I don't think you see that today in the Middle East, loving the enemy. Secondly, Islam is a religion of peace. That's a deception. Islam is a religion of the sword. They call that themselves, and their God is the God of the sword. And for them, peace is Islam is pacification. So pacification comes from the word peace, but it doesn't mean peace. Then thirdly, they say God and Allah are the same. And the reason I have a 3-year jail sentence in Switzerland is because I said Allah is Satan, Lucifer, the devil. Allah is not the God of Israel, the God of the Jews and the Christians. And so for the 4th deception, they believe in Jesus Christ. And the fact is, Jesus Christ, according to Islam, is coming back as a Muslim warrior who's going to kill the Antichrist, who's a Jew. And then he's going to go up to the Temple Mount, pray with the Muslims in Jerusalem, and then come down, break the crosses, destroy the churches, and destroy the synagogues of the Jews and the Christians. And on that day of judgment, all the Jews and Christians who are considered by Islam as one people, the people of the book, all the Jews and Christians will have their throats personally slit by Jesus Christ the Muslim. So I don't think that's the Jesus of Nazareth that we all know and love. And then the fifth deception is the Quran is a holy book, and I prove the Quran is a joke book written by a rabbi and a priest who were forced at the edge of a sword, and then upon completion of their work, instead of being released, they were slaughtered by the Muslims.
So again, those are 5 deceptions of Islam, and the article we've posted there gives you a link. But let's, if we can, just before we come to the bottom of the hour break, talk about what people can find on your website. And again, it's vicmord.com. Or if you don't know how to spell that, we have it there. This is a way in which people can find out about your speaking, your seminars, your books, and other resources. But talk about what's available to some of our listeners.
Okay, I also wanted to add that I have produced 47 YouTubes in English, and they're all free. And so that's hours of teaching. And just, go to YouTube's Avi Lipkin, and all this stuff pops up. And, of course, my website is like an introduction to all those things. Of course, I have a website bookstore where I have my books, CDs, and DVDs. Many of my CDs, DVDs produced by Chuck Missler. And so there are links to many, many different things that are of importance to Jews and Christians to be better armed with the truth to defend themselves and to defend America.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Avi Lipkin, but we also want to open up the phones. If you'd like to join the conversation, perhaps you have questions about fighting this war on terror, the deceptions of Islam, the presidential candidates, what is happening in Israel, as I mentioned before, even this nuclear arms deal with Iran. All sorts of questions are certainly fair game, and I wanted to leave an open line for this last half hour for your comments or questions. So all of that available at the website, pointofview.net. As you go there, don't forget we are, of course, in the midst of an election season. 2 weeks from today is the election. And so if you haven't clicked on the Pray, Organize, and Vote material, there are some great resources for you. We encourage you to take the pledge and then, of course, use the voter guide that we have available to you and all sorts of other resources that you might want to take advantage of. We have a video that comes from one of the conversations we had recently with Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter. And then also, of course, my Viewpoints commentary. And as I mentioned just a while ago, we also encourage some of you to consider joining with us in our cruise to Alaska in August. We'll get these brochures out to you shortly, but you can actually begin to find out more information by clicking on the banner that is there, and that's an opportunity for you to find out more and to put that on your calendar and join with us. We're excited about this possibility, and as I mentioned before, it won't be just me and some of the Point of View staff and my family, but also Penna Dexter and her family will be with us. Kelly Shackelford and his family will be with us. It's get a little bit like our weekend edition where we sit around the round table and discuss some of the issues, but we'll be doing it for an entire week on the ship as we also have a chance to explore Alaska. So I'm looking forward to that and encouraging you to go to the website and find some of the material, including the link to Avi Lipkin's website. It's all available at our website. And again, if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
They call this the information age. It used to be news was hard to come by and there were very few sources. Now, the problem isn't so much locating information, it's all over the place. The problem is figuring out who you can trust to bring you truthful analysis and insights. Job loss in America. Is it China's fault? Is poverty around the world increasing or decreasing? Are the undercover Planned Parenthood videos really deceptive propaganda or a window into a world that many people don't want you to know about? What kind of experience does it take to be a good president? Is putting women in our special forces a great idea, or are there issues you may not be considering? Kerby Anderson has talked about all of these and much more on his regular Viewpoints commentaries. Sign up to get them in your inbox each weekday. Go to pointofview.net. Click on the link at the very top left of the page that says Connect with Point of View. That's pointofview.net and connect with Point of View. Let Kerby help you sort through information overload and find the truth with Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, Avi Lipkin with us. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about Israel, talking about the Middle East, talking about the election. And let's head out first to Arizona, KNLB. Charles, thank you for calling today.
Okay, what I have first to your guest, Judaism is the foundation of the Christian religion, and I don't understand anybody that can't follow that. The Bible's been written by Jews, except maybe Dr. Luke. The jury's still out on that one. But the Jews can live without us because God has given that right to them. We are adopted in. We're adopted in. Now, I want to get into this Democratic thing. In 2012, the Democrats, in a voice vote, and I listened to it with my wife. I couldn't believe it myself. They threw the name of God out of the Democratic Party, which is unheard of until that time. Also, they delineated Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It was unbelievable. The Republicans haven't done that yet, but I would just like your guest to comment on that and why it isn't brought up more by not even you guys, but the mainstream religion. No one's hardly talking about this.
Well, let's talk about it. Avi, certainly you've been paying attention to the remarkable differences, even in 2012, between the Democratic platform and the Republican platform. But Charles is raising, I think many of us remember that voice vote and some of the boos and things of that nature. What are your thoughts?
Well, indeed, if certain leaders in the Democratic Party said, let's support Israel, and there were so many boos, and the boos, were outweighing the yeas, then the Democratic Party is indeed a very, very sick party, a very anti-Semitic and anti-Christian and anti-patriotic party. So this is something that obviously is horrible. I have to tell you something. I've written, of course, in my books about certain things that have happened, and here we have a candidate by the name of Hillary Clinton, and what everyone's forgetting is that her husband, forget about the sexual, the things that he did. 1994, PBS came out with a documentary by Stephen Emerson called Jihad in America.
Yes.
This was a fantastic video. It spoke about the 1993 bombing in New York City of a bomb built by Ramzi Youssef. And the documentary was made with the help of the FBI, the CIA, and the State Department. And, I was in San Antonio at the time, and I saw the movie. And then the next day, I told people in church, here's the 800 number for PBS. Call them and get the video. And the second night, people came up to me and said to me that under pressure from Bill Clinton, this is what they said at PBS, and from the Arabs, this very important documentary was removed from the shelves and squelched. In 1995, a bomb went off in Oklahoma City, and I cover this in my books.
Yes, you do.
And the Clintons blamed... Huh?
Yes, you do. Go ahead.
The Clintons blamed the Christians, Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh. They blamed the crazy Christian right-wing militia for the bombing in Oklahoma City, when I prove in my books very clearly that this was Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And the Democrats have been saying all along, very wrongly, that there was no connection between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. And of course there was. Ramzi Youssef was Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. He was an agent for Saddam Hussein, but he worked for Al-Qaeda. And he was behind Operation Bojinka to blow up 12 American airliners from the Philippines. All of this is common knowledge in the FBI, CIA, State Department, but the Clintons tried to cover it up and then to blame the Christians for the attack in Oklahoma City. Then there was the shooting down of TW-800, and the NTSB covered it all up and came up with this cockamamie excuse that there was some kind of a fuel injection explosion in a 747 that had never happened before and never has happened since. And so, what I'm saying is that there are a whole lot of things that happened which were anti-Israel, anti-Christian, anti-America. Clinton also forced Netanyahu to give in 1998 to give up Hebron, 80% of Hebron, and to actually give up more land. What saved Israel at the time was Monica Lewinsky. And then what did he do? To get off the hook with the perjury and the impeachment, he went to Saudi Arabia and made an agreement with the devil there to bring the price of the barrel of oil down from $18 to $8 a barrel, wrecking the Texas oil industry. But prices were so cheap and so wonderful that the impeachment was overturned by the Senate. And then as soon as the impeachment was overturned, the deal with the Saudis was that they could raise the prices whatever they wanted. And so it went from 18 down to 8, and then went up to 32 to 50 to 70 to 100 to 147. And all this within 10 years, and the world economy crashes because Bill Clinton had an affair with Lewinsky. So I'm just saying there are a whole lot of crazy things that are going on. These are people from the 1960s, the anti-Vietnam War protesters who were, I'm not saying that anti-Vietnam War protesters were bad people, but these people were on drugs, they were communists, they flew the Vietnamese flag, burned the American flag. These kind of people hate Israel. They hate the Jews, they hate the Christians. Anyone who hates the Jews is going to hate the Christians and vice versa. And I don't understand how Trump has not mentioned any of this in the election, because Hillary and Bill are really they're two of a kind. They're together in everything.
One of the things you mentioned too is Stephen Emerson has been on the program with us, and again they pulled those videos. Stephen Coughlin, this is even closer, was giving what they used to call the red pill briefings about Islam. The reason they call that is you remember from the Matrix, do you want to take the red pill or the blue pill? The red pill gives you that. And then eventually, because that was too controversial to talk about what really was happening in Islam, the Obama administration pulled that. So if you believe that we have done a good job in the Clinton administration and Obama administration, then obviously you want to elect Hillary Clinton. If you think we've made some big mistakes, or if some of the things that Avi has shared with you need to change, then I think you need to talk about a change. But let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to Texas this time. And Sherry, you're on with Avi Lipkin.
Yes, gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking my call. I was in a Bible study last night, and we were talking, and one of the people in our group was telling us about how the refugees that are coming into the country and into Europe, they aren't from Aleppo, they're from Damascus, because Damascus has been wiped off the face of the earth. I was just wondering why we haven't heard about it on the national news stations or BBC, and if either one of y'all have any insight into that.
Avi?
Okay, well, yes, indeed. Damascus is not wiped off the face of the earth. There are neighborhoods in Damascus which are controlled by ISIS. To the east of Damascus, there are neighborhoods and areas which are ISIS. To the south of Damascus, actually almost on the Israeli border, in Deraa, there are areas controlled by the rebels and the ISIS people also. It's a hodgepodge of a map. Damascus is still standing, but it's the areas of Damascus which are controlled by the Shiites, the Christians, the Druze, and the Yazidis. Now, what's happening in Syria is wherever the Sunnis win, and the Sunnis are backed by the United States, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, wherever the Sunnis win, the Christians die, the Druze die, the Yazidis die, the Kurds die, and the Shiites die. And so I'm not saying that Bashar al-Assad is a good guy, but what I am saying is that those opposing Bashar al-Assad want to see the annihilation of the Christians in the Middle East, and so it's very ironic, but today the Shiites are defending the Christians, the Druze and the Kurds and the Yazidis. Israel is watching very carefully. We have not gotten sucked into this yet. My most recent book is called Islamic Rivalry, and it deals very, very clearly with what's going on. And, I'll say one more thing. I go down to the old city, to the Christian quarter, and I meet with my Christian Arab businessmen friends, and they say to me, why is it that Vladimir Putin of Russia is a Christian, and he's the savior of the Christians in the Middle East by supporting Bashar al-Assad, and America, under the Muslim President Obama, is working to annihilate, to destroy Christianity in the Middle East? And I say, you know what? I think you're right. Putin has converted Russia into a Christian country. He has banned Soviet communism, which is atheist in nature. And I'm going to say something very sweeping now, and that is indeed that the European Union, as I said earlier in the show, blames God for the wars in Europe, blames nationalism, patriotism for all these wars. And the reason the world doesn't like Putin is because he is a religious Christian, and he's bringing about a Christian revival in Russia. They don't like American Baptist missionaries because this is a holdover from the Cold War.
Sure.
But Putin is a religious nationalist.
Be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Graduation is a happy celebration, but graduate Brooks Hamby was a nervous wreck. Brooks was from the small town of Brawley, California, where he earned the right to deliver an address to the students as the salutatorian of his graduating class. The school felt the need to review his speech, rejecting the first two versions of the speech he submitted. He was told to remove all references to Jesus, God, and generally to be less religious. The third time he submitted his manuscript, it was returned to him with black marks censoring any reference to religion. But not only that, Brooks was told by his principal that if he tried to read the religious parts anyway, his microphone would be shut off mid-speech. Well, as the ceremony approached, Brooks was anxious. What should he do? What could he do? If he listened to his principal and hide his faith, he would compromise his convictions. If he didn't, he would be publicly humiliated. Brooks chose to reference his faith anyway. Remarkably, not only did his microphone stay on, the video of his bold speech sped throughout the internet in the days following graduation. We sent a letter to Brawley High School reminding them that when a student has earned the right to speak to his peers, the school should listen to him instead of censoring his faith. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Avi Lipkin. We had Sherry on just a minute ago. She was talking about the destruction of Damascus. You find that in Isaiah 17, so that may have been what they were talking about in the Bible study, that at least some have believed, as it says there, that Damascus will disappear. So he may have been saying in that Bible study that it will disappear, or that the destruction illustrates that. I don't know. But nevertheless, while we're talking about some of the prophetic ideas, I know that as you look at Israel, you see a lot of similarities there as well, because in 1968, Israel had a population of, in round numbers, about 3 million Jews, now about 6 million Jews. You have all sorts of people coming to Israel as a safe haven, And it's kind of reminiscent of what we see in Deuteronomy 11 that talks about the borders of Israel will expand from the wilderness of Lebanon all the way to the Euphrates River. What about that? Is that sort of a prophecy being fulfilled before our very eyes?
Okay, well, one of the things I've been sharing in the churches all along is that, especially in the last 20 years or so, 30 years or so, the Muslims have been buying out the universities here in America, Israel now. And I say that there are about 30 million Muslims in America because the Sunnis, the Arab Immigrant Association claims 7 million, the Shiites who fled from the Ayatollahs 9 million, Nation of Islam 4 million. That's 20 million right there, and that's without the Somalis and the Chechens and the Bosnians and all these others. But the bottom line is 10% are terrorists. We're talking about 3 million terrorists who all have guns. These people all are armed. The whole idea of a gun control is to take the guns away from the innocent people, leaving the terrorists and the criminals with the guns. And so what's going to happen is I believe that 6 million Jews from America and other Western countries are going to either die at the hands of these Muslim terrorists or flee to Israel with their Christian spouses. Intermarriage with Christians in America is 80%. So we're talking about, I think, 10 million potential immigrants to Israel. And I do believe that our borders are going to expand because at the same time, I believe God is using ISIS to depopulate the Middle East. This war is depopulating Syria. Syria was a country of 20 million people. 10 million people are now refugees. 500,000 have died. Damascus, at this point, has not been totally destroyed. It's the Sunni areas that are being pounded into oblivion. But if Russia, for whatever reason, pulls out of the struggle, and I believe that Putin's life is in great danger from the oligarchs of the economy of Russia, who just want to join the European Union because money is their god. And so I don't know how long this Christian revival will continue in Russia. The reason the world hates Russia is because of this Christian revival. The reason the world hates Israel is because Israel is a Jewish religious nationalist country. And the reason the world hates Trump is because Trump is a religious nationalist leader. And Trump is going to be one of the greatest revivals in America, God willing, if he wins the elections. So, Trump, Netanyahu, and Putin are all hated by the world because they don't go along with the globalist game. But yes, I believe God's plan in the Bible is that Israel's borders will expand and Israel's population will grow. Today we're 6.5 million Jews and Christians. I think we're going to go up to 16 million in the very near future.
Fascinating. Let's take at least one or two more phone calls. We'll go to South Carolina. Nick, thank you for calling today.
Thank you, Kerby, for taking me. My question was about the tie-in with Hillary and Wilma Abedin and Barack and the increase in the Muslims in this country. And also, I think George Soros is tied in there somehow. And that whole thing is a puzzle to me that they're not charged, and Hillary isn't charged for the stuff that she has done and fomented under the RICO Act. And the same way with George Soros. He's behind the Wall Street thing and the Black Lives Matter and Hillary being running for president and Barack being president.
Well, again,
am I wrong?
Yeah, sometimes in the mainstream media, you hear more about the Koch brothers than you do about George Soros. But I mentioned earlier on the program today George Soros. But, Huma Abedin, let's talk about that for a minute, Avi. Mother very tied to Muslim Brotherhood. As a matter of fact, we did an Outlook magazine, and I could probably send it to you, Nick, in which we document, because this is pretty well known, individuals in the Obama administration that have close ties or direct ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think that is going to continue even more so under Hillary Clinton because of her connection with Huma Abedin and the other connections with the various Muslim Brotherhood, as well as you pointed out, Avi, the Saudi money. So help us try to answer Nick's question real quickly.
Yes, indeed. I would further add that the last 8 years of Obama have brought in an incredible amount of Muslim people who are terrorists into the U.S. administration, into Homeland Security. The President of the United States surrounds himself with Muslims. And a lot of these people, it has been proven, are part of the Islamic agenda to destroy America, destroy Christianity, make America a Muslim country. And indeed, my wife Rachel, who monitored the broadcasts in Arabic for the Israeli radio services, picked up many broadcasts in which the Saudis were saying that Obama has 3 tasks. And one of them is to destroy Iran, secondly, destroy Israel, and thirdly, destroy Christian America, make it a Muslim country. And how do you destroy Iran? You make a deal with them, give them a lot of money, give them all the wherewithal to go nuts and prepare for war with Israel, and you give them Articles 75 and 76 in the agreement, which gives a hydrogen bomb fusion technology to the Iranians so that they will attack Israel, so that Israel will then be destroyed, but then Israel, with its submarines, will counterattack and destroy Iran. So that's wonderful. Obama kills 2 birds with 1 stone. He kills Shiite Iran, he kills Jewish Israel, and then, as I said before, the 30 million Muslims, bring in 10, 20 million more Muslims. Christianity is now in America, it's becoming a very uncool thing to do. And Hillary's going to continue it.
Just before we run out of time, again, your book that you mentioned just a few minutes ago, Islamic Rivalry. Of course, Islam prophesied in Genesis, the Christian revival for Israel's survival. All of these books and all sorts of videos that you can find on YouTube are available. But again, all they need to do is go to your website, vicmord.com. That stands for Victor Mordecai. And Avi, I appreciate you being with us today by telephone from Israel. Look forward to the next time we have you in studio with us.
God save America.
Let's say goodbye to not only Avi, but the program today. And I might just mention that tomorrow we're going to spend a little bit of time talking with our good friend Jim Dennison, who will be in studio with us. He has a new book out dealing with some of the major issues that we need to address here in the 21st century, 7 critical issues, the state of our nation. And you've probably enjoyed having him on in the past, and we're looking forward to that again. Also part of the Dennison Forum, and that is something that we've talked about not only with him, but with Nick Pitts, who's one of his associates. So we're going to spend some time in the second hour talking with him. First hour, get back to some of these issues in the news. We've talked a little bit about what's been happening with this issue of Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. We'll get into a few of the other issues that are coming down the pike and monitor the early voting that is taking place and whether or not we have any other problems with these voting machines. Again, don't forget that these voting machines are linked indirectly to someone Nick talked about just a minute ago, and that's George Soros. So there are just a lot of issues to talk about. We'll certainly try to cover those tomorrow, and as always, give you a chance to join the conversation. Visit the website, pointofview.net. You can get our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. Don't forget that as we get closer to the election, I'm noticing that very few donations come in, and I know why. It's because of the uncertainty and ambiguity. So if you could help us out and click on that button that says donate or write to us, again, we would greatly appreciate it. We need to take a break, and we will come back here tomorrow and look forward to seeing you then. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. We'll see you back on Wednesday.
Imagine it's January 2021. The president elected in 2016 has served 4 years. Tell me, what does the Supreme Court look like with maybe 2, 3, even 4 justices named by this next resident of the Oval Office? Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? Depending on the results in November, 4 years from now will look very different, and together we can influence those outcomes. We need each other. Together we are the Truth Team, and together we can honor Christ as we exercise our stewardship as believers and citizens. One way to make a difference is to visit pointofview.net and support the Truth Team, pointofview.net. Or give when you call 1-800-347-5151. The nation is so divided, we must be united. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.